Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you all to this meeting tonight. The title of the meeting is Covid-19, a very hostile environment. This is a joint meeting between the East Anglia Workers Coronavirus Support Group and Stand Up to Racism East Anglia. I'm not going to take up too much of your time with introductions because we've got quite a few speakers and we want to have the maximum of discussion. I would like to say though, it would be really nice if people could open up the participants window. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a button labeled participants, because then if you want to speak, there's a button in that window labeled raise hand. It's also useful to open the chat window and introduce yourself in the chat. We're going to be recording the meeting, so if you don't want to be recorded, say so in the chat. The recording will only record the person speaking. So if you don't speak, you won't be visible on the recording. We're also going to live stream to YouTube and to Facebook. So if you have to leave early, you'll be able to catch up with the rest of the meeting in your own time, at your leisure. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and our first speaker is Rahul Mehta, who is a junior doctor. I'll just find Rahul. So Rahul, I've unmuted you. Over to you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me properly before I begin? Yep, great. Okay. So my name is Rahul. I'm a junior doctor working in Colchester, but I'm also a medical school graduate from Norwich Medical School. I'm a member of the British Medical Association, so that's the trade union for doctors, and a supporter of Socialist Appeal. So I think the statistics around COVID deaths amongst BAME frontline staff is quite sobering. But I think life's always been a bit more difficult for BAME workers in the UK, and these sort of disproportionate deaths, expose some of the reasons why I think being BAME in some ways is a perfect storm for some of the socioeconomic risk factors for becoming COVID positive. So in terms of exposure, BAME workers are overrepresented on the front line. For example, in London, 67% of the adult social care workforce is BAME. And across the country, that's 500,000 BAME care workers, of which a quite staggering 60,000 are in poor health and often receive little support from the private companies that employ them. If you don't believe me, you're welcome to ask the Labour MP Nadia Whittam about that. So these roles, whether in health or social care, tend to be quite hands-on. So of those BAME staff who have died, nearly twice as many nurses have died and doctors and surgeons. And I think that's because statistically you'll find fewer non-white people in the most senior grades compared to lower grades. And just another quite staggering statistic is that just over half of all Black employees in the UK work in public admin, education and health. So again, very sort of front-facing and frontline jobs. I think on a biological level, BAME individuals are also less likely to recover if they do develop an infection. So conditions such as heart disease or diabetes make our bodies less able to cope with the virus. And so within Black British communities, that's about 3 times risk of diabetes compared to white communities. And for Asians, that's 4 times as likely to develop diabetes. So there may be a genetic component, but we also have to account for socioeconomic factors that underlie these sort of health inequalities. What's more, these workers also live in squalid and overcrowded housing. So COVID is certainly airborne, but it also clings to surfaces. And if you're from Norwich, you might be familiar with the houses on Newmarket Road, which are a bit more detached, and it's a bit easier there to socially distance and isolate themselves. But what about those on your local council estate? It's markedly harder to do so. In fact, the top 5 most densely populated areas in the country have 70% more cases than the top 5 least densely populated areas in the country. And the fact that 6 times the amount of BAME workers compared to their white counterparts live in overcrowded houses, you can see how that can also be a factor that plays into it. So overall, BAME workers tend to be more exposed to COVID, both in the workplace and at home, and then also medically or biologically struggle to fight off the disease once they do get infected. But I don't think the solution necessarily is just to promote more BAME staff into senior roles, as it turns out the NHS is currently considering, or just encouraging more cultural sensitivity training in the workplace. I think that's window dressing on a deeply rooted issue. I think these problems are quite structural and show a relationship between race and class. So, COVID is highly infectious, but some factors influence who is more likely to get it. So state school children, for example, are being thrown back into schools very soon, while Etonians are still on holiday. Construction workers are being called back onto construction sites, but their bosses, for the most part, tend to be sitting at home quite safely. So I think overall, the best way to stand up to racism is to stand up to the system that uses it to keep us divided. And I think the future does look quite bleak for all of us. Half the global workforce, of which the majority are BAME, is at risk of unemployment. And even after COVID, we're set to see the biggest recession in the last 250 years or so. So we have this system of so-called sort of free markets, but wealth ends up being concentrated in the hands of the few. And we're the fifth largest or fifth richest economy in the world, and we're still unable to source basic protective equipment for our frontline workers. I don't think it's the case of a broken system, as some suggested. I think it's just a system that was never really designed for us, the workers, and our needs. So I think for our own sake and those of our children, we can't really afford to be complacent. I think now is the time to actually make some more demands in terms of those in charge. And I think principally workers need to decide themselves when and where it's safe to work and under what conditions. I think we need proper personal protective equipment, or PPE, for all frontline workers. And overall, we need a fully funded national care service. So just to wrap things up quickly, if I had the time, I just want to give my thanks to the work of frontline staff. So not just nurses and doctors, but also cleaners, porters, carers, retail workers even, and our local posties. I think for too long, a lot of you have been treated as unskilled or forced into unfair contracts and used essentially as if you were dispensable. I hope this crisis proves, amongst many things, fairly, that your work is essential to the running of society. It was the late Ted Grant who said, "Not a wheel turns, not a phone rings, not a light bulb shines without the kind permission of the working class." I think it's about time that society recognized this immense strength and accepted that the safety of all workers, be they BAME or not, are at risk as long as we don't have control of the levers and cogs of society itself. So I think I'll wrap up there, but thank you again for having me.
Thank you very much, Raoul. That's a great way to kick off the meeting. I'm going to call on Gawain next, but before I call him in, I just want to make some apologies. So Jamara, who helped to chair our very first Stand Up to Racism first online meeting, is working tonight. Naomi Kerr, who also took part in our first meeting, wanted to talk tonight about disability rights. And unfortunately, she hasn't been able to make it because of pressures of work. And the Secretary of the Norwich and District Trades Council has been unable to join us as well. So now let's hand over to Gawain, who is a teacher.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Wendy, and thanks for the invitation to say just a few words today. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the situation facing schools and what we can do about it. So really, I want to say three things. First of all, the position we're in now, because there's been a lot of information over the past few days. Secondly, what our strategy is to respond as a union. And thirdly, where I'm hoping you may be able to help some of us. Myself, I'm a primary school teacher in Norwich. I'm also a member of the National Education Union's National Executive. So over the past few days, we've had an awful lot of information about school openings, and there's so much out there with the government saying one thing, scientists saying another thing, but I think all of it can be pared down to some really, really simple truths that we've heard over the past few days. And the key, I think, here is actually on Friday, we had released the report of both the SAGE group that's been advising government and the independent SAGE group that was set up because of concerns about the way in which government was using the scientific evidence. And many things in those two reports completely agree with each other. And one thing that comes out really, really strongly is that the evidence on this simply isn't clear enough to be called one way or the other. However, there is something that is clear, and that was from the Independent SAGE report, which came out on Friday. They looked at the risk to students, to educators, and therefore to whole communities because of the spread of the disease. And they looked at that risk at different points in time. And the key finding they had was that if schools were opened or began wider opening 2 weeks later than the government's preferred date of 1st of June. So if those school opening dates, wider opening dates, could be delayed by just 2 weeks from the 1st of June to the 15th of June, that would halve the risk of the infection being spread. Now, I think this is massively significant because what it tells us is that the union's campaign all the way along and the campaigns by parents to say the 1st of June was too soon have been completely correct. And secondly, it tells us that if we can push that date back just by 2 weeks, then we can actually save lives. So this has become the key focus of our campaign. There's another reason that pushing that date back, even if only by a couple of weeks, is so significant. That would make the difference between being able to implement the test, track and trace program, which has been so fundamental to the 5 tests the union set out at the beginning for returning to a wider opening of schools. And I keep saying a wider opening because, of course, schools are open. We're open at the moment. I've been going into work because we're catering for the children of key workers and for our most vulnerable children. So that gives us a really clear position. So the union's strategy following that has essentially been to focus on 3 things. First of all, the number of schools, the number of academy trusts, the number of local authorities that we can push back through the pressure that we put on to opening later than the 1st of June. And every single one of those is a victory because every single one of those protects lives. So that has been our key focus. It's what we've put a lot of our energy into. There's a petition that we launched, a local one in Norfolk, which hopefully someone will be able to post a link in a chat. We've now had over 1,600 local parents sign up to say that 1st of June is too soon. We've been working with the local authority. We've been working with school governing bodies. We've been working with heads to give them the confidence to say, no, we're not going to open on the 1st because we care about our school communities and we're going to push that date back to save lives. The second thing we've been working on is that where we cannot get that shift from the schools where for whatever reason there's pressure on that school to open or to consider wider opening for the 1st of June, we want to support members to be able to respond to that collectively. We want educators to be able to say, actually, you're putting our lives at risk, you're putting the lives of our students at risk, you're putting the lives of our community at risk, and to be able to respond collectively to that pressure to open on the 1st of June. So those are our first 2 key areas. Then the third area, I think, again, links with what your last speaker was talking about, because we're well aware that even when schools do move to wider opening, there are certain groups of educators, certain groups of children who that still won't be suitable for. We have children and educators who are in vulnerable categories. We have those who are living with people in vulnerable categories, and therefore there's a risk of infection spreading to them. And of course, we have what we know is an increased threat that the virus poses to Black people, which will affect Black educators, but also it will affect Black children in our schools. So the third area we've been focusing on is providing support to those people, whether in vulnerable groups or our Black members, to be able to say, actually, no, on these grounds, we still don't feel safe attending, and we would rather be working from home. So we're applying collective support there for that to be the case. And also, of course, ensuring that what's provided educationally, once we go to wider opening, what's provided for children still at home is still of suitable quality, because what we don't want is to create a 2-tier system where some children are in school and receiving an educational experience that others aren't receiving. And we already know there's too much inequality in the education system. So the absolutely key bit, how can you support us in these campaigns? Because I'm really hoping there are people out there who agree with the positions that we've put forward and really want to support what we're doing. And there are a few really, really simple things. The first thing I would say is that please do write to your MP, please do write to your local school, please do write to your local council, okay? Those key 3 people, the national decision maker, the local decision maker, and the workplace level decision maker, the more pressure they receive from parents, from local residents, from others to delay that opening, the more lives that will be saved. So please, please, please do write to them. These decisions are being taken all the time. In the past half hour, I've heard of 2 more councils in the country. One of them was Lancashire. I've completely forgotten what the other one was, but 2 more councils in the last half hour have issued new guidance saying 1st of June is too soon and schools should delay their opening. So please keep that pressure up. Your MP, your local council, your local school, please write to them right now. The second thing that you can do is to sign that petition, particularly if you're in Norfolk. There's a petition out there saying to the local authority 1st of June is too soon to open. So please sign that. If you're not in Norfolk, please sign whatever relevant petitions, open letters there are in your own local area. And then the third thing that you can do, please do talk publicly about these issues. Please talk publicly about the threat that this poses and encourage people to support the parent boycotts about going back to school, to support educators in that difficult position of having to stand up collectively and say it is too soon to open. The clear message we want to get out there is we have to push opening back beyond the 1st of June, because that will save lives. We have to support those trying to push that opening back, and we have to support our vulnerable members, our Black members, if it is not safe for them to go back into the workplace. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Gawain, and solidarity to all the school workers who are trying to defend the rest of us from infection by trying to avoid an early return to school. We know that getting the schools back is not just about children's education. I don't think anybody believes that for a minute. I think most people understand that it's about forcing workers to go back to work in unsafe conditions. I forgot to introduce myself. What I've done, I've put it in the chat. So if you're reading the chat, you can see a lot of other things going on, but if everybody could just put a couple of lines about who they are, what they're members of, and so on, that would be great. Our next speaker is Raleigh from Stand Up to Racism East Anglia. Over to you, Raleigh. You let me unmute you. I will there you go.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to give another talk this evening. So what I want to say, first of all, is I want to take this opportunity to say I'm sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of racism. I'm sick and tired of the racial divides that divide us as human beings. I want you all to be sick and tired with me as well. As the disproportionate impact of this COVID virus has become so apparent, I want to say I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yes, the disproportionality of Black and ethnic minority workers or people due to COVID can be explained in many ways. But when it's all said and done, it still boils down to the same thing. More ethnic minorities are dying. Not to discount the death of all people, but to say racism has reared its ugly head once again. I'm sick and tired because for hundreds of years, we have been suffering from racism and being at the end of the brunt of this oppressive system. I grew up in Zimbabwe, so I know of overt racism, but the racism here in Europe is more pernicious, insidious, and clandestine, which makes it harder to fight and harder to call out. And the policy or policies which best demonstrate this is the hostile environment. How the law, social, and economic policies are designed to specifically harm and target vulnerable ethnic minority groups. The hardest racism to fight is state-sponsored racism. Post-COVID, as Stand Up to Racism, we really need to galvanize and rally our resources to fight and end racism once and for all. I have children and don't want them to grow up in a racist society. We have powerful people in this organization like Diane Abbott, and with the right political will and campaigning, we can bring this issue of race and racism right to the heart of government and national consciousness and debate. This is why I started a petition, which I'm actively promoting, calling for an urgent debate to be held in Parliament on the issue of race and division in this country. We try and sweep it under the rug or shy away from discussing it, but for all our sake, we should be having these debates openly and positively. The right and the racist right is galvanizing through being inspired by people like Donald Trump and Matteo Salvini in Italy and Marine Le Pen in France. The left needs to make a stand as well. Socialists need to make a stand, and people of good conscience need to make a stand as well. Racism has a long history and has profited its proponents very well, causing untold suffering. And this suffering and effect of racism is still with us today. Migrant labor props up the NHS. A large majority of frontline workers are ethnic minorities. Slavery helped build the opulence of the West. Yet this same group of people still face existential challenges that cause them to die earlier, younger, and disproportionately than other groups. This overrepresentation of ethnic minorities in prisons and other measures of observation is directly linked to racism. It's manifest across the board, and COVID has again highlighted this. Racism is silly. I can't find a better word. It's truly ridiculous that some people genuinely think that your skin tone defines your humanity. It is tantamount to judging people based on their eye color or hair color. It's ridiculous and outmoded, and we need to upend the system that maintains this horrible way of looking at each other. I will call again for support with my petition. Let's work together to end racism. Yes, there are scientific claims that the high incidence of COVID amongst both Black and ethnic minorities is due to vitamin D deficiency. But even that speaks to the displacement and oppression of ethnic minorities escaping countries ravaged by Europe's colonial past. It all leads back to the same thing. Furthermore, more Black and ethnic minority people live in urban and overcrowded areas, which increases the chance of cross-infection. This too speaks to ethnic minority oppression, characterized by policies like the hostile environment. The contributions of Black and ethnic minority people need to start being acknowledged in this country and in the world. If we can upend the racist institutions of the West, we can change the world because of the West's hegemonic influence over the rest of the world. The fight has to be won here, and we all must unite to win the battle here for the sake of our future generations. When Mandela was released from Robben Island, he was later quoted as saying words to the effect that he had done his part and the rest is down to the future generations. I say today that we are the future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Riley. Thank you. I'm going to call on our next speaker, which is Clive Lewis. Clive, are you ready? If you let me in, that's it.
Yes, I think I am. Can you hear me? Thank you. Great. Thanks for tonight, and thanks for inviting me to speak. I wasn't expecting to make a speech. I was expecting a conversation, but that's fine. I'm happy to talk for a couple of minutes on the current situation, and I'll try and focus maybe on some of the broader politics. It's fantastic to listen to some of the speakers tonight, and I think I've been making some notes while they've been speaking about what they've said. And I think we have to be clear, and I think it's been said already, this isn't, COVID-19 isn't a racist disease, but it does highlight perfectly the disease of racism in our society. And I think ultimately what we're seeing is that social and economic injustice is affecting everyone within our society, those who are at the bottom of society in terms of social disadvantage, the jobs that they're in, the pay they're in, the conditions that they live in, they work in. And COVID-19 in that sense, the perfect spotlight on all of those issues. And it's affecting all working people disproportionately, if we're being really honest, because we don't have a farm with a forest to go walking in on the other side of the country, up in Durham, unlike some people. We live on council estates, cheek to jowl. Disproportionately, working people, and in particular black people, live in areas where there are high levels of pollution. There's research to show that this virus can actually be spread potentially by pollution. So you can see how this basically shines that spotlight on those inequalities within our society. I think one of the things I'm really keen on doing, and what I've signed up for at the moment, is I've signed up for a new race equality strategy that this government needs to uphold. And I've signed, it's on my Facebook now, I've signed up to that, calling on the government to implement this strategy, to be able to kind of look and to set up a new institution as such, to be able to get to the very bottom and to get to the heart of these race issues within our society, which COVID-19 has highlighted. But look, we can be honest with you, I want to see an end to racism, but I think we have to accept that it is integral to the very underpinning of the society that we live in and the economy that we inhabit. And it isn't going anywhere soon unless we change radically and fundamentally the very structure of our economy and society to one which moves beyond racism, moves beyond discrimination. That's not happening anytime soon, but we have to make sure that we use the opportunity presented by COVID-19 to push as far and as fast as we can, and to take the opportunity to try to build back better within our economy and our society. Now, one of the things that I'm really focusing on at the moment is in terms of inside the Labour Party, is in terms of black self-organization. And this is something I'm afraid is actually quite shameful inside the Labour Party, because I'm afraid, we're not going to be able to tackle the issue of racism, of national, of identity, of self-identity, and the issue that in this country, I'm afraid, issues of patriotism, of nationhood, of self-identity. It's an issue that people in my party, so many people in the party, really don't want to discuss. It's in the too difficult box. We like talking about, our heartlands, and we like talking about the traditional working class. I think we all know as black members, and many comrades as well, know what's meant by that. And we want to get to the bottom of it, and we want to lead that debate. And we want us as a party to have a proper understanding of the history of this country and the Labour Party in its part in what is in effect structural racism. And that has to be led by black members. It can't be led by anyone else. And so I'm just going to share with you an article that just went out the other week on open democracy, which is about black self-organization in the Labour Party. It's a long read, it's 1,000 words or so, but I'd urge you to read that, because we're not going to be able to have the policies that we want, the leadership that we need, unless we start with black members and black MPs organizing in the party like women do, like LGBT members do. We need this, and it's been kept away from black members for far too long, for 40 years. It goes into the history of black sections. So I think actually having some black leadership on these issues, because people are angry at the moment, but I'm afraid to say that just a knee-jerk response, an inquiry here, a policy there isn't good enough. This goes far deeper. It's systemic within our society and within our party, not being able to challenge and have the ability to be able to discuss these issues in a way that I think many black members will be happy with, black and ethnic minority members will be happy with. There's another campaign that I would urge people to get involved with, which is launching in the next week or so, and it's the Build Back Better campaign. It's a broad umbrella grouping of different trade unions, civil society. I know the TUC have been approached, and it's basically trying to put all the different campaigns that people are going to run now and after COVID-19 to be able to try to ensure that we build our economy, our society, our NHS, our public services, our care services, the way we treat people better in the future. This is an opportunity. It's a potential paradigm shift. We cannot let it go. We cannot let the pain and the anguish that COVID-19 has unleashed be missed. It's an opportunity that we have to take. And I think that's one that's been made very clear by a large number of people across the country in recent weeks and months. I just want to pick up as well on the issue of PPE. And I think it's really important here. I mean, I was talking to nurses the other day, and they were explaining to me why they've had research come back to them, which is that only 49% of BAME medics claim that they've had properly fitted PPE. So in terms of face masks in particular, compared to 75% of their white colleagues. Now, that is a shocking disparity, and they went into why that could be. And it kind of, in a way, paints a perfect picture of what has happened to our NHS services. What's happening is there are 17 different brands of face mask that are coming to our hospitals, sometimes when they go down to just a 48 hours notice, down to the bare bones of the kit that they need. And these masks are coming in and they don't know whether it's going to be brand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 17. They don't know. And every time that you get a different masking, you need to be able to fit it to your face. And that means that there's wastage, because once you've tried it on, no one else can, and it has to be thrown away. And with such such short supply, it means that very often there aren't enough masks for people to try out to be able to see that they've got the right one. And there's the concern that many of these companies are making masks that fit predominantly white men. So there are certain groups of ethnic minorities whose masks, because of the shortage of supply, because of the outsourcing, because of the multiple brands, are basically unable to get a mask that fits in properly. And that could be one of the reasons, one of the multitude of reasons why black medics are dying more often. So you can begin to see how insidious the free market, outsourced shortages and economy within internal economy inside the NHS is proving. And we already know that the supply chain for PPE, of which there are 4 parts where different organizations can take their cut in the supply chain, you begin to see how insidious racism is. It's built in, hardwired into the very fabric of our economic system and our public services at the moment. So what I will say is thank you for the work that you're doing. I am really going to be pushing with other MPs. There is pushback on this, but with other Labour MPs to ensure that we have a proper black and ethnic minority voice in our party. One of the first things that Kate Osamore and myself and others who've been pushing for this are going to do once it's set up, and it will be set up in the coming months as an organisation of MPs formally instituted within the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, is to call for an inquiry and to have our own inquiry into COVID-19 and racism and the spotlight that it has shone on it. And I think it will be very, very informative. So thank you very much, and I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clive. That was excellent, and good news. If you can get that group off the ground, I think that would be a great step forward for the Labour Party. One of the participants has posted a link to the, what's it called? Bring back forward. I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, we posted a link to that. Build Back Better, that's it. I know that your former colleague on the Shadow Cabinet, John McDonnell, was in a climate change meeting the other day. He said he's fully supporting the motives behind the campaign. He just doesn't like the word back. He wants to go forward, and I think we all want to go forward to a better world. But I'm going to call in our next speaker, who is Ian Duckett. Ian, let me unmute you. Right, I'm having trouble unmuting you. There we go. Over to you, Ian.
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much to all the speakers. I've really enjoyed hearing all of you speak, and been called in at fairly short notice just to say a few words on behalf of Norwich and District Trades Council, because Dave Kent, the secretary, is indisposed, and so I'm on the executive committee, and I'm the education officer, but I'm also a member of the Norfolk National Education Union. So as well as endorsing the 5 tests and everything else that Gawain said on behalf of the NEU earlier, I would like to support the message of both of the 2 groups that put this meeting on together, Stand Up to Racism East Anglia and the East Anglia COVID-19 Workers Support Group. I'm a member of both groups, and I mean, I don't think I can add much to the debate really, other than support and say that the trade growth initiatives and is doing all it can to pull the trade union movement together locally to support both an anti-racist agenda and the wider kind of worker struggle. it's no surprise, of course, that COVID-19 is having a disproportionate effect on our Black and ethnic minority communities. There's also a socio-economic dimension to it, of course, people have gone into. So I just want to remind people of those. And just as I finish my very short input, I would like to post two things on the chat page. One is the TUC's anti-racist COVID-19 statement, which I think gives a very, very powerful message, and it's endorsing again the things that people have already said this evening. And an initiative which Raleigh and myself were involved in on behalf of the Stand Up to Racism East Anglia movement, if that's the right word for it. We call Stand for Humanity, which is a creative project about trying to tackle racism at this time. And I think that's probably enough from me. So thank you very much. I'll put it on the chat and ask Kevin if he will also email those out or send them out on or WhatsApp platforms for the two groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I'll put you back on mute. Thanks for the last minute stepping in as well. So our next speaker is Joe Rust. Over to you, Joe. I'll unmute you.
Yeah, hopefully my sound is on now. Thank you, Wendy, and everybody who's taken the time to organise this, but thanks to all of you who have actually logged on to either participate or to listen. It is appreciated, and I think at times like this we get used to a new way of working. I'm the Secretary of the Kings Lynn District Trades Council, and I'm an elected borough councillor, and in my day job I work within the NHS. Before I go any further, I just would like to just mention the death of George Floyd yesterday in America. Another shocking and seemingly needless, pointless loss of a black life. And I don't think, you know, we must make the mistake that this is only happening in America. We know that it happens here, and this is why Stand Up to Racism is so important. So, you know, I just want to take a moment to think of him and his family. We know that COVID-19 is still sweeping across the globe, and apologies if I go over anything that anybody else has already said. It's the nature of the beast when, you know, there's a number of speakers, but it's also good for these messages to be reinforced. That some of these deaths are avoidable. We know that many of the care home deaths were avoidable. We know that people working in care homes have been affected in a way that they needn't have. And as has already been said, and we know the virus is having a disproportionate impact on our BME communities, but unfortunately, only 7% of worldwide COVID deaths record ethnicity. And this is something that needs to change if all the government are serious about the need to halt this virus everywhere and not rely on things like herd immunity. And as it is at the moment with the incomplete data, there are risks that some sections of community will remain in a vulnerable position. But what we do know is in the UK and other developed countries, we're not looking at poorer countries that haven't developed. We are looking at countries like the UK, Norway, America. BME people are dying in larger numbers than white people. And one report found that from February to the end of April, black people in England were 71% more likely to die from COVID-19 than white people. And in the Asian community, it was 62% more likely to die. Now imagine that, looking in the mirror and thinking I am more likely to die than, you know, a white workmate working in the same situation. That's not a work environment that I feel comfortable with. And while we know, as Rahul mentioned, there is research taking place to see if there's a genetic component to the higher death rates, looking at any innate differences in the way people's immune systems respond, we do know that BME communities face greater chances of poverty, structural discrimination, as has already been said, and this worsens the risks to them going to work, facing a greater likelihood of death. And we know that there are social reasons why ethnic minority groups may generally be more vulnerable, and that includes a greater chance of malnutrition, as Clive Lewis said, more exposure due to pollution, due to where they live, or a greater likelihood of working in a less healthy environment. And this is where, you know, I look at the NHS, and we know that in the NHS, BME healthcare workers are more likely to die from COVID-19 than their white colleagues, as we know in general society. But how can that be the case in the NHS when we've got nationally agreed terms and conditions, we've got health and safety regulations, and we've got trade unions supporting staff? Well, actually, within the NHS, we know that Black people and people from minority ethnic groups are more likely to be taken down a disciplinary route over issues with their work than their white colleagues. And this was widely recognised, so much so that the NHS has been encouraged to adopt a different culture of working after Baroness Dido Harding, she of the now Test, Track and Trace fame, wrote to all NHS trusts just 1 year ago on the 24th of May 2019, telling them to adopt a different culture. And this was following on from an investigation into the suicide of Amin Abdullah in late 2015. Amin had been the subject of an investigation and a disciplinary procedure that was protracted and included serious procedural errors throughout. And Amin was treated so badly that his mental health was severely impacted on. And this whole experience led to him taking his own life. He set fire to himself and he died. And as a result of that, the NHS were told that they had to do an investigation. In 2017, there were 16,000 disciplinary investigations in NHS trusts in England. And the research again has shown us, as we already know, that too many of these organisations treat BMA staff harsher than they do their white colleagues. So, you know, we've talked about structural racism. It is inherent in too many of our NHS trusts. And so it should come as no surprise to hear that BME colleagues are more likely to be pressured into working with inadequate PPE, as has already been said, and they are less likely to raise concerns about workplace safety. And if they do raise concerns, they are less likely to have these concerns acted on. Clive has already said about ill-fitting PPE, because a white man is the test dummy for everything. I've got a book upstairs, Invisible Women, waiting to be read, but you know, there are too many sections of society that are invisible because of the test dummy, you know, model, which is a white man. Now, there are several other high-profile cases of terrible race discrimination in the NHS, including Richard Hastings and Elliot Brown. And it demonstrates that even when BME staff reach relatively high positions within their organisations, which was what Amin Abdullah was, he was a band 6 nurse. Richard Hastings was relatively high up in IT. Elliot Brown was one of 3 financial directors. So these were high up, relatively high up people within the NHS. They are still facing discrimination. So as the majority of BME staff aren't in higher grades, they're more likely to face less safe conditions and feel less confident to either refuse to work or to speak out about it. Because if they see their higher up Black colleagues facing terrible treatment, what are they? Well, they know what sort of treatment they're going to face. What I would say is within the NHS, there is work being done to address this discrimination, but the same can't be said for other workplaces. You know, I've already said Dido Harding wrote to all NHS trusts as a result of the Amin Abdullah case. They are now seeking to bring in a just and learning culture, and they're just two words, you know, just and learning. It's down to the NHS trusts themselves to give those words meaning. But in other workplaces, they're not being risk assessed. Black and Asian minority ethnic groups aren't being risk assessed, at least in the NHS. That is something that BME staff are now being able to access a risk assessment to ensure that they're not to assess their level of vulnerability. But when I talk to local government colleagues, despite having fewer BME staff in their ranks, this risk assessment, which would take a matter of, you know, far less time, it isn't happening. And so sadly, I think that while COVID-19 has highlighted that BME workers are at greater risk than white colleagues, I suspect that there won't be the rapid transformation that we need to see to ensure that they're working in comparative safety. And so for trade unions, for trades councils, for people in the workplace, the battle is going to have to continue. And I think it's absolutely vital that we support people like Clive, who are taking it up in Parliament, people like Raleigh and Wayman, and everybody that's fighting this battle in our workplaces, on our streets if necessary, so that people feel that sense of solidarity and feel the confidence to stand up and speak out. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you. Right, our last speaker is a National Stand Up to Racism co-convener. Probably doesn't need an introduction, but here he is, Wayman Bennett. Now, after he's spoken, I will be hoping that we can throw the floor open to everybody else to have their say. So just use your raise hands button and let me know if you want to speak. Over to you, Wayman.
I want to thank everybody and the speaker for such a cogent explanation of where we are. And I'll add just a few points. The first thing is that Britain has achieved the highest death rates per capita than any other Western country. It's a different distinction. We have to understand what that means for us now. The first wave killed, according to the ONS, 55,000 people and the FT, the highest amount of people. And firstly, it wasn't necessarily an accident. If you compare Germany to Britain, the things that matter is the fact that they had PPE and they had a plan. Why didn't Britain have a plan? Because it was too busy using racism to divide and rule. And what I mean by that is there's something called prevent, not prevent pandemics, but prevent the question of targeting particularly the Muslim community as a problem. Since 9/11, since 2015 and the Act, they've spent £100 million a year. That's, imagine 500 million pounds have been used to prepare for this pandemic and bought the PPE, had the plan, had the job, had the tracing. It's easier to trace a child that has said something in a school that somebody they say doesn't like than it is to trace the disease. That's not an accident. That's something that was put in place because the hostile environment put it in place. If you're a doctor or anybody in those systems, up until last week, you had to prepare to do a surcharge for your family. The NHS couldn't prepare because people who were working in it were discriminated against. That has led to people's deaths. The third thing is the levels of death is not, in some sense, they say it's due to vitamin D, whatever it is. It's the two R things. Firstly, R, the amount of people that have got the disease. That's because they started off with herd immunity. That's because they started off and they still have the herd immunity. And what do I mean by that? Cummings, the so-called person that advises, turns around and says, the rules don't apply to me. It applies to you. And actually, how does it apply to us? Eton is shut. You know why Eton's shut? Because their kids matter. That's why he goes where he says, your kids Of course, you're not a good parent. What matters to us? Every good parent should boycott what's going on in schools. Why? I was a teacher for 15 years and I had to used to do a learning plan when I was in East London because there was an outbreak of tuberculosis to trace what was going on in the home and the school. There's none of these plans in place. And what they're going to do when large numbers of people die is say it's your fault. You didn't social distance. You didn't do the right thing. And actually, we live in a multiracial society. And there's a problem with the Conservatives. They've made a mistake. They don't realise the majority of us are actually living in integrated families. It affects millions of people. And they don't want to make a stand about this. And I think we have to make a stand. I'll tell you the truth. I met Jesse Jackson years ago. And I said to him, when you were a young man, what made you stand against the civil rights? He said, there's a moment where you know something's wrong. It's not about your career or your future. You have to make a stand. I met Nelson Mandela when he came to Britain and he came to Brixton, and I asked him the same question. He goes, there's a moment where you have to make a stand and you don't know where it's going to take you. I'm sorry to say, we've seen the slaughter of our elders, the people they talk about in the VE Day they really care about. If you don't put PPE inside care homes, you don't test people before they go in there, do not tell me it's an accident. It's a willful neglect of the people who they say that they care about. They call them heroes. Don't clap people and slap people the following day. That's what they do. Say, clap, we're clapping you, and then we're slapping you. That's not good enough. And the reason why I'd say that we've come to this moment is that people do not have to die. The first wave, the truth is, most people, they do not have to die. We have to do something in terms of solidarity with the Black community, but solidarity with everyone. Gary Young said that the death of BAME communities is a canary in the mine shaft of what's happening in our society. It's an X-ray to the discrimination that exists. What we're asking people to do is to sign the petition for a public inquiry, because we have to remember the people that have died, but we also have to fight for the living. We shouldn't forget them, because that's what they're trying to do when they say get back to business. There isn't going to be getting back to business though. That's what Stand Up to Racism is doing. This is the worst time I've ever had this job, to be honest. I'll tell you why. People ring up and say someone's died. Can you do something about it? And I'll give an example. Somebody tasered by a police officer. They work in the NHS, by the way, and they're doing an extra shift. They went to pick up their kid. They're rushing to drop the other thing, trying to do that. And they said, you were speeding. And they tasered him in front of his 4-year-old child. Now, if that had happened to Dominic Cummings, I'd have a little bit more sympathy for him. If they tasered him for going up and down, saying, I've lost my eyesight, I can't drive a car, I'm testing my eyesight, I'm driving a car without being able to see, I'd have a little bit, I mean, all this stuff, the fact that they actually try and put that nonsense to us is unbelievable in terms of those people who are responsible for it. And that's why, I remember this stuff. People say, where does it come from? Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember them selling off the council houses. So we can't social distance because they sold off the houses. I remember them privatizing the NHS, telling us it's a really good thing because it's whatever it is. I don't want to remember, I remember when the disease came and we thought it was really wrong. We spoke up about it, but then we didn't do it. This generation can do something about this. We have to stop the schools going back. It's a very simple thing. My friends work in 2 places, one in St. Thomas's Hospital and another hospital called the Royal London Hospital. They told me they nearly ran out of beds. They nearly, literally, you can watch it on BBC tonight. They ran out of space inside the morgues in order to bury people. This is not just one of those normal things. Literally, if they take those kids back to school, they know that that place will get filled up and people can't be treated, and they don't care about it. They actually don't care about it. And we have to turn around and say our kids aren't going back. And what's more, part of the reason why kids aren't going back is because we're going to hold you responsible for what happened. Stand Up to Racism, Diane Abbott, Bell Ribera, all the people have come together and said that we've put forward the question of calling for an inquiry, and we're calling for a question of boycotting people going back to school in solidarity with the teachers. But I would like you to do another thing inside all the different towns that exist inside East Anglia. I'd like you to collect the names of the people that have died and make sure they get a voice. Everybody that died, make sure they got a voice. Record what happened to them. Don't let them bury working class people and tell us that the people don't matter about what's taking place. And Stand Up to Racism has to collect that stuff, because we're going to have to hold these people. We're going to have to hold these people accountable. But the first thing we have to do is, I call the Tory party the new friends of Herod. Herod was famous for wanting to slaughter the firstborn of all the children because he was worried about the birth of a Messiah in terms of stuff like that. The Tory party should change its name to the Friends of Herod Society because they're not happy with slaughtering our elders. They now want to slaughter our children. We have to stand up for them because actually the idea of a 3 or 4 year old, I mean, Cummings admitted himself his child caught something, but he didn't know what it was. They don't know what it is. They don't know what the children are catching. So let's stand together in solidarity and unity. And I tell you one of the reasons why we have to do this, because afterwards somebody's going to be blamed. And I tell you now, those people that started off with hostile environments, the Prime Minister said I was a watermelon smiling person, a piccaninny smiling up there. He said that women were bank robbers because the way that they're dressed. And by the way, it looks like lots of people are bank robbers now because everybody's wearing a mask. It doesn't seem to be very an un-British thing. Not a problem anymore. No longer a problem. No longer culturally distinguished. Are you separating yourself? No longer a problem because it never was a problem in the first place. They use racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism in order to divide us. And we have to come together to do something about it. So that's what Stand Up to Racism is trying to do. And we have to give people the tools to be able to do it. Thank you very much for listening to me. And I really want to end up with this thing. The thing that will make a difference is what each one of us do and the amount of people that we get to do is. Let's clap and celebrate the resist, but let's resist on the 1st to the 15th. If we keep the school shut, if we insist on a plan on testing and tracing, if we say our lives matter, I mean, I think our thing shouldn't be stay alert, it should be stay alive. That's what we should, if we want to stay alive, right? That's got to be our watchword. And if we win that, we win something for a future generation to try and shape what happens afterwards. Because I tell you what, when they've spent the money, they're going to turn around and say it's our debt. I saw somebody in an island saying, it's very bad to tax rich people because it's not going to encourage them. So it's very much to take everything away from people who've already been hit with wherever it is, as if that's an idea. People before profit is my thing, and stop racism. If we put the two together, we've got a chance. We've got to give our future a chance. And I've gone on too long, and I want to thank the people here for coming together. I've done lots of these meetings, and I can tell you now, the rage of what's happening is widespread. Let's give it a direction, and let's understand we can do something about it immediately. Let's not wait, and let's make sure we make a difference. You're making a difference now by making a stand. It's a very good meeting. We cannot give up. We have to fight for the future. Remember the dead, fight for the living.
Thank you very much. A round of silent applause from everybody there. Thank you, Wayman. So, opening it up to discussion, I'll just let you know that we're going to finish at 8:30 or sooner if we run out of contributions. But I can see that I've got one hand up at the moment here from Kevin. I hope you've all worked out how to raise your hand by now. It's in the participants pop-up window, and I've got Kevin and then Martin. Over to you, Kevin.
Hello, can you hear me? Good, thanks. Really two things. The background I got behind me is what we did last week. Small protest, but an important one. Somebody was attacked on their way home. A man of 40, there was just a brief report in the local paper. He was set upon by a gang of youths shouting racist stuff at him. Bricks were thrown at him and the rest of it. And they mentioned the road where it was happening. So we organised a proper, respectful protest for two reasons. One was to say, we're against this stuff. We're not going to have it here. And number two was to say that chap needed the support. I don't know who he is. It was never mentioned. It was never publicised. But we went down that street, and that's the demonstration we did. And it was socially distanced. We did all the right things. So nobody's going to get ill because we did that. And we got in the paper, we got it in the local paper, and so on. And tomorrow we're going to do something similar, this time over the premature opening of the schools. Same thing, we're going down at midday to Lowestoft Riverside, where the council offices are, and we're going to have the same sort of thing, a socially distanced protest of this sort. Maybe it won't be very large. We've done it at the last minute, and we'll do what we can do. What I'm saying is that's important because there's not much happening outside of the bubble of Westminster because loads of people are, you know, held down and so on by the, you know, house arrests essentially. So we're going to go. So we're going a socially distanced protest there to say that the council should be urging the schools not to open even these academies, which seem to have a life of their own, and that therefore, you know, for the health of the kids, for the health of the teachers, for the health of the parents, and for the health of the community in general. We're doing that. Okay, I would urge everybody, well, if you're in Lowestoft, I imagine most of you aren't as it happens, but if you're in Lowestoft and you've got the time, midday at the council offices. If you're not, organise something down your way because there'll be another day of action on Monday. Organise something when the people come out to clap. Get a loud hailer and say to people, hey, why don't we do a protest against the school for early opening and so on. Then support the staff in that school who say, I'm not coming in because it's not healthy to come in. You've got to get it right. They've got to be the 5 tests before we come in. We've got to be on the side of those people. And any action you can do, however modest, pushes that agenda forward. That's what I'm not just preaching to the converted. We're doing it, so you do it. Thanks.
Right, thank you, Kevin. Very passionate there. I forgot to say, actually, Wayman mentioned about remembering the names. One of the very first people in our area who died of coronavirus was a good friend of Norwich Stand Up to Racism and a member of Norwich Labour Party, Stuart Goodman. So we start by remembering Stuart. Right, Martin next.
Hi, my name's Martin. First of all, I think it's totally unacceptable that there is still racism in a country which, let's not forget, has been cosmopolitan and multiracial for what, 65, 70 years? I mean, that is just simply not acceptable. But actually, one thing that Rahul referred to is the number of people from BAME backgrounds working in the NHS. Now, every government says that they are proud of the NHS. Every government says, oh, yes, you know, the NHS is our great thing. Well, if we simply were to publish figures showing how many of the employees of the NHS are from BAME backgrounds, well, maybe it would stop some people thinking. And second, Wayman made the very good point that one of the reasons why we've got one of the worst death rates in Europe is because there's no plan. How ironic that somebody called Cummings, yes, that's right, somebody called Cummings claimed that a year ago he knew that a pandemic was coming. So there we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Right, I forgot to say who was going to come after Martin. So the next one is Pete and Mary, followed by John Russell.
Hi, it's me. One of the things Wayman said is I'm nearly 66, a bit vulnerable because of various health things. And when this whole thing really begins to start, I kept saying to people, the Tories are trying to kill me. And actually, people were saying, well, that's a bit overdramatic, Mary, but they bloody well are. I'm one of those people that's in that generation of people that they're not the heroes of the Second World War, but that generation afterwards. And we're the people who are supposed to be expendable. We've retired. We're not worth it. We don't have any economic value. And actually, when I think of all the people I know who are grandparents, great aunts, people who look after children for people, if Britain has the highest level of charges for childcare in Europe, right? Grandparents are crucial in that respect. They shouldn't be, but they are. We're a generation of carers. I look after my mum, she's 100. And we are dispensable. And I think what the thing about Wayman's contribution that I really liked is the anger. Do not hide your anger. These bastards are trying to kill you. And you should say that at every opportunity. Don't be mealy-mouthed about it. don't say, if people say to me, it's your responsibility, I tell them to fuck off, actually. I'll be as careful as I like, but it's not my responsibility. I'm not the person who's trying to kill other people. My responsibility is to keep myself and my family safe and to fight like tooth and nail to get these people out, because they are trying to kill people. So Wayman's absolutely right. Herd immunity has never gone away. We are expendable. And I tell you, I'll be out there tomorrow with a little placard, because I'm in isolation in my bloody front garden, saying support the teachers. I've got posters in my front window. I live in the middle of nowhere. I do what I can. I do it on social media. I have arguments with people all the time, and I show that anger. So don't be mealy-mouthed about it. Don't be apologetic. Get out there and say, stop killing us. Yeah, we have the right to live.
Thank you very much, Mary. And people are getting angrier as the meeting goes on. So next is John Russell. Over to you, John.
Hi, yeah, my name's John, and yeah, I work in adult social care, and as Rahul and various other speakers said, this sector is like largely dominated by low-paid and BAME workers, and the care industry itself is dominated by the private sector. You know, pay is basically minimum wage, contracts are pretty questionable, and the chaos in handling a unified response in this corona crisis that protects the workers as well. Clive, you mentioned the madness of all the sort of privatized PPE. So I really think there's never been a better time for a demand for a national care service, working in unison with obviously a fully funded NHS. And I really can't think of a single care worker that I know that wouldn't agree with that. And Rahul raised this demand in his contribution as well. So I guess this is kind of a question to Clive Lewis, really, in a way, because this is a commitment that Labour made under Corbyn's leadership, but Starmer's been completely silent on pushing on this, despite the time being more than ripe. So I was wondering what sort of noise you can make about the question of a national care service, and what do you think of Starmer's silence on it?
Thank you, John. If we have time, I'll bring Clive back in at the end, but maybe Clive will want to answer that in the chat. So the next speaker is Richard. Richard's going to be followed by Hugh. Because Hugh's a co-host, he can't raise his hand, but he's said in the chat that he'd like to speak. And then after that, it'll be Caroline. So Richard, over to you. Richard. Richard, I'm trying to unmute. Richard,
it's okay now, is it? All right. Yeah, first, I'd just like to say, just answer what Raleigh said. I mean, it really is despondent that the world as it is, that in fact we still have racism around it. It really is very, very worrying, really, that in fact the world can't get together. We see more division in the world as every day, really, and it's a shame that we can't, that the world isn't coming together in the way it should be. The second thing is I'd just like to report on the issue of the education. There was an emergency meeting of the Unite branch, Great Yarmouth Unite branch, on Sunday, and it moved a resolution which was moved by Mike Smith-Clare, who's a borough councillor, and basically said Unite Great Yarmouth and District stands behind our teachers at this time. Primary school teachers and teaching staff across England are being pressured to return to the workplace from June 1st, 2020. And then it's going, we wholeheartedly agree that the education must return. However, it must not include attendance at a school and other facility until it is safe to do so. We stand in solidarity with all the school staff and those affiliated unions in deciding not to return back to school until the Covid-19 tests have been met. And that's one question I'd like to speak to some of the speeches, speakers is on this test and trace. I think in fact this test and trace strategy has been forced on the government. They didn't really want to do it. The fact that they collapsed it in the early days anyway, I think they've been forced to do it. And also my concern is how it's going to be structured. I mean, obviously it's being run by a company. I'm not too sure what company it is now because it's a nationwide rollout, which has been announced today. It should be done on a decentralized basis through the local authorities, with maybe medical officers at each school, so that it can be linked in a network way. But my understanding is that in fact it is going to be rolled out by a private company. I think it's Circle, or maybe it's other companies as well, and whether it's just England and in England. But that's a question I need to answer. That's the main question I'd like to ask some of the speakers on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. So next we have Hugh, followed by Caroline. Hugh, can you unmute yourself? No, hang on, you're not unmuted. That's it.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, I think that Richard's point with the government has been forced to do things, and they've been forced to do it by union power, and the unions are getting together, and they've been led by the NEU, and we're moving things. We had a meeting of 20,000 people last week of NEU members. That was amazing to be in, but it shows what power we have, and that's back on the agenda, and it needs to be back on the agenda because we're fighting and we need to keep up the fight. And now we've got a big fight for schools. It's ridiculous that some schools are opening on the 1st of June. The risk is halved by the 15th. We've got to make sure that we do our best to keep schools closed. We've got another meeting tomorrow, of this group for parents, and you can find out about that online on the Facebook group. Please come, because we've got some really good experts. We've got to organise. We've got to stick together. We've got to end this society where racism is so terrible. And we're all being killed. Just a quick story. My brother is an NHS consultant, and he was given such inadequate PPE. Everybody he knows has got it, and all health workers are getting it all the time. Thankfully, he got over it, but the doctor who he shares the ward with didn't get over it. Everybody's being killed, but Black and minority ethnic people are more in the firing line. We've got to end that now, and we do that by protesting now.
Thank you, Hugh. After Caroline, I'm going to ask Clive and then Wayman to come back because there's been questions directed towards them. So very quickly, and then we'll wrap up with a couple of announcements. So I'm going to unmute Caroline. I don't know why my unmute button doesn't seem to work. Is somebody else competing with me to unmute Caroline? There you go, Caroline, over to you.
And what Joe Russ was saying about the death of George Floyd, I just can't help going back to that because that's not an isolated case. There was a chap gunned down by 2 white guys, one of which was a police officer, and there's a whole history of loads and loads and loads of these horrendous cases, and I find it very upsetting. My daughter lives in San Francisco, and she tells me that every time something like that happens, there's demonstrations all over the place in America, and yet this still seems to be this thing that the people doing this, these murderers, they just believe they can get away with it, and they do. It's just, you know, I feel confused and about that. So I just wanted to say that because I always think that with racism, we're not far behind America. We copy what America does here eventually, and so I don't want us copying that. The other thing I wanted to say is that we've done tried to do quite a lot. I mean, I went round today and put up 6 posters saying that it's unsafe to go back, you know, because the 5 demands that the NEU have put forward are excellent demands, and not one of them is in place in the country. So I don't see how we can go back, but we've got to carry on fighting. I mean, there's petitions, we've done the petitions that Clive spoke of, or someone else spoke of as well. I even had a couple of friends asking me, could they have some petitions and letters to sign? So, you know, I've spread it around using social media. The other thing I wanted to say is about this idea that obviously there's loads of reasons why people of the BAME community are dying more that we've explained, and I don't think we need to go into the genetic thing. I think that's the wrong road to go down, especially as, you know, basically the Tories, they are eugenicists. So, you know, just cut that. You've got plenty to go on that is wrong in society without needing to worry about that, because I mean, it's the economy, economic deprivation, you know, lack of housing, overcrowding and so on is enough to go on. Over and out.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you. I noticed that Clive has left the meeting, so he won't be answering any questions. I'm just going to hand over to Wayman now to sum up, and before I do, I want to make a couple of announcements. So the People Before Profit National Health Workers Support Group has called for 2 days of action, tomorrow and next Monday. So tomorrow there are posters available that you can print off. We can send them out to you, but you'll find them on our Facebook page. You can hold them up and take a selfie. You can do it anywhere. You can do it at home, you can do it on your doorstep, you can go to your nearest town hall or county hall and take a photo of you there. You can join the Lowestoft one. There's talk of going to Norfolk County Hall tomorrow, but we'll have to post that on the Facebook page if that gets off the ground. I just want to thank everybody who's participated in this meeting. And of course, if you want to watch it again because you were distracted by the chat and you missed something, it will be available on YouTube on the Love Music, Hate Racism channel. So I'm going to hand over to Wayman if I can find him. Where's Wayman gone? Oh no, there he is.
I want to start off by thanking everybody for their contributions, and I think it's been a really important meeting. And one of the things that I was told by Jesse Jackson, actually quoted Frederick Douglass, he says, "Power can see to nothing without a struggle, without a fight." That's what he quoted, and I think that's what we're in. We're in the fight for the lives of other people, and everybody here is naming people that have died. And it makes me incredibly angry because I just think that what's really been they're trying to normalize that you just accept that. And I think that what we're involved in is trying to shape what happens. And there's 2 reasons why we want to shape it. Because if we don't put the blame on those people that are responsible, I tell you, after this, they're going to put the blame on other people. They're going to blame refugees. They're going to blame somebody else. And it's very important that we do this, because I believe that if you've got 35% knocked off GDP, the far right are already marching. Salvini's already marching. Le Pen is already organizing. They have an alternative explanation since the worst crisis since the 1930s. I think we have to come with a positive thing and begin to do something which we've not done for many, many years, and that is shape what happens around this crisis, first in terms of protecting the community, but also in terms of shaping what happens afterwards. Because the more people we mobilize, the more people will be able to have a say in what happens, the more we'll be able to do something about this. And so, firstly, the first thing to do is stop the schools opening up over the next couple of weeks. And by the way, in many countries, they're not opening up because they haven't been able to put a plan in. In fact, they're not opening up in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and in Wales. The only place opening up so far has been postponed, has been England. I also want to thank the people of this for one other important reason. you also stopped Tommy Robinson and his crew and all those other people acting as an alternative. Could you imagine if you'd been able to turn the EDL, the BNP, into 20,000 people they were able to turn? I think the things we saw in Michigan would have happened in the towns that you're in, Ipswich and various other things, if you hadn't exposed that as a lie. This is a vital thing that you've been able to do, and I really thank you for it, because I know how difficult it was all the way from Great Yarmouth in order to do that, in order to stop that. But there's a lesson in that to us. We defeated those people by our unity, by black and white unity, and saying we stand together against those people. We now have to deal with a bigger fight, and that is keep the school shut. But also, I think we also have to have that solidarity with other communities, that people that are isolated. And I personally find it, many of the people I know in the care home that died, I refuse to forgive or forget. I refuse to accept that their lives didn't matter, that it didn't matter what happened to them. And so I repeat this slogan again, what people before prophets say: remember the dead, but fight for a living. And I'll say this as well. The hospital that saved Boris Johnson's life is called St. Thomas's. And I want to say they tried to close that hospital. The Prime Minister's admitted to being an oxygen thief. He said he needed gallons and litres of it to be put down his gullet in order to survive. That was supplied to him by many, many nations across. He even had to agree that it was migrants that played an important part in saving his life. The very people that this government tried to block, and which we've always said that our unity is the key, and we shouldn't forget that. We're right about this. We're actually right about this in our things, and it's the time we really have to stand up and be counted. And that final insult of people like Cummings driving around and saying, I tell you, many of us stayed in and we didn't want to. Be honest, we didn't want to. I know people I know my brother, his father died. He didn't go to the funeral. It's not just that it's insulting and people say, get beyond it. It actually exposes that we have to do something, because nothing's going to be done. He brazenly sat down there and said, I don't care what happened. It doesn't really matter. We have to turn around and say we care about everybody in our community. And actually, it's not up to billionaires to decide what happens. And afterwards, when this carnage is explained, I don't want it to be explained by saying that people that haven't got jobs can't buy things and stuff like that, have to pay more, and our lives become worse. So thank you for this meeting, but let's remember the dead, fight for the future, no going back. And brothers and sisters, stay alive and fight for your lives, and fight for the future of both our children's lives and for our future. We're not going to concede anything. We stand in the tradition of the suffragettes, the LGBT activists that fought against Clause 24. We stand against those people that fought for apartheid, fought for all those things, and now it's our turn. It's our turn to fight remember the dead and fight for the living. So let's stand together in unity and go forward in this struggle.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Wayman.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Keep
Bye.
fighting. Bye.
Stay safe.
Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
See you tomorrow, hopefully 6 o'clock.
Bye-bye.
Well, not everybody's gone immediately. Ian's still here. I can see him.
Yeah. Is Kevin still there? Yes.
Yeah.
I've been sending you a message because Wendy said you'd be able to send out the links that I put on the chat. Is that going to be okay?
I'd be able to send out what?
I put 2 links on the chat. Wendy asked me to alert you to it so you could send them out to people who attend the meeting. Is that okay?
Well, I'll have to. It'd be best because this is going to disappear when the meeting goes. If you sent it to me,
okay,
on WhatsApp.
Don't worry, Ian.
I'll send it. Yeah.
The meeting's been recorded, so that means the chat's been recorded as well. So Hugh's got the ownership of the account. He'll be able to see the chats and find the links. And do you want them put on the Facebook page?
Maybe whatever you think is best. The two things I put on are a very good TU statement about deaths of the community, and then I also used as to put our creative blog that we did through Stand Up to Racism East Anglia. So it'd be good if they could get out to a bit of a wider audience.
Yeah.
The meeting hasn't been recorded on Zoom. It's been recorded on Facebook.
Oh, you did?
So it's recorded, but only on Facebook.
Oh no.
What's wrong with that? Oh no, only on YouTube.
Yeah, because we don't get the chat. You have to record it on Zoom to get the chat with all people's introductions and everything.
Okay.
Well, shall I send it to somebody then?
Yeah, send it to me. Send it to me and send it to Wendy. Just send it and we'll put it up on these things, you know.
Okay.
Just send it. You've got it. Send it. It's okay.
Right. Okay then. Bye everybody. See you
Bye.
tomorrow.
Bye. Take care. Stay safe.
Okay. Are we doing anything tomorrow? Is there anything planned?
Yeah, 12 o'clock.
Yeah, I got you.
No, what for
you people got homes to go to? Bye.
See you, Kev.
We didn't plan a motorcade for Thursday. We've got the meeting at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
We've got the clap during that the branch meeting. We could do something more if people want to do something more.
Well, can we do something on the 1st of, I mean, we don't have to do it collectively. I can do it on my own. On the 1st of June. Anything planned for that?
Say that again.
What about the 1st of June? Have we got anything planned for that?
I think we need to make plans for the 1st of June, but we can do that from the branch meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to end the meeting now. Hey, Poppy, you haven't spoken yet. I'm unmuting you, Poppy. Hello, Poppy.
Right, I'm going to get some food.
I can't unmute, Poppy. See you later. See you later, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.